Why did the colonel stop walking when the inspection wasn't even meant to slow him down? Boots echoed across concrete. The motor pool breathed heat and oil and routine. Nothing here was supposed to surprise a man like Colonel Mason Riker. He had seen deserts burn, cities fold, teams vanish without sound. This was supposed to be a walk-through, paperwork made flesh, a formality. Then he saw her forearm. The wrench in her hand paused mid-turn, not because she sensed him, because the bolt was tight, because precision mattered. Sweat rolled down her temple, catching the Arizona sun, tracing a line across skin that had learned to endure worse than heat. And there it was. Ink faded, deliberate. A black serpent coiled tight around a bullet. Riker stopped breathing. Time didn't freeze. The motor pool kept humming. Engines coughed. A forklift beeped. But something inside him collapsed inward, sharp and sudden. He knew that mark, had known it in blood and fire, had helped bury it, along with 5 names and one coffin they said was empty. "She's logistics," someone muttered nearby. Riker didn't hear them. Because the last time he saw that tattoo, it was smeared with ash and cordite, disappearing beneath a body bag that never should have been sealed. "Cade," he said, voice lower than protocol allowed. The wrench stopped. Ryland Cade slid out from beneath the vehicle with a movement too clean for a mechanic. No wasted motion. No hesitation. She stood, not at attention, not defiant, just present, like she'd been waiting for this moment without believing it would come. Their eyes met. Recognition didn't explode, it settled. Riker didn't ask questions, didn't confirm details. He reached for his uniform like it was choking him. Buttons came undone. Jacket, shirt, undershirt. Gasps rippled as he exposed skin no one on that base had ever seen uncovered. The same tattoo stared back. Same serpent, same bullet, same placement. And beneath it, a scar that told the truth paperwork never did. "She's not logistics," Riker whispered, not to anyone in particular. "She's Black Viper 1. The words didn't echo, they sank. Ryland didn't react, not outwardly. Inside, something long buried cracked open, not relief, not fear, a quiet, dangerous clarity. Only 5 had walked out of Black Hollow Ridge. Only one was supposed to stay buried. And she had been very good at pretending she was dead. What happens when the dead are recognized by the living? Ops Chamber 7A hadn't heard her name in years. The walls remembered, though. They always did. Ryland stepped inside with grease still under her nails and a heart that refused to race. Panic was loud. She had learned silence. Riker stood facing the map, not looking at her, as if seeing her once was already too much. "I watched your file burn," he said. "I watched mine fold into a flag," she replied. That made him turn. Guilt lived in his eyes, not surprise, not doubt. Guilt, the kind carried by survivors who did exactly what they were told and still lost everything. "They told us you went down with the second bird," he said. "They weren't wrong," Ryland answered, "just incomplete." She told him about the wreckage, about waking up weeks later with a new name and a discharge code so clean it couldn't be traced, about being buried alive in maintenance bays and grease and anonymity. "They didn't kill you," Riker said finally. "They caged you." She nodded once. Then he showed her the drone image. A face in shadow, a biometric hit in a dead zone, a name that tightened something behind her ribs. "Willow Nash." "That's impossible," Ryland said. "Nothing stays buried forever," Riker replied. That was when the quiet became heavy. Someone was pulling threads tied to Phantom Unit 11, someone with access above colonel level, someone who understood ghosts weren't hunted for closure, but for leverage. "They're not cleaning history," Ryland said slowly. "They're rewriting it." Riker slid an envelope across the table. Red wax, no insignia. Echo Mark Protocol. Not a command, a choice. She didn't hesitate, because pretending was exhausting. Why does surveillance feel louder than gunfire? The cafeteria was too quiet. Ryland noticed reflections before faces, stainless steel, glass, a man stirring coffee he never drank, posture wrong for civilian, attention too controlled. She ate slowly, calmly, built the map in her head. When she stood, the man tapped his earpiece. That was confirmation. Surveillance didn't follow, it boxed. By the time she reached the motor pool, she'd memorized exits, faces, rhythms. Connors met her without words. Ops chamber now. Inside, Riker didn't sit. They have dossiers, he said. Yours is first. Fear didn't arrive. Fear was useless. Clarity did. She took the envelope again. This time it felt lighter. Because she wasn't hiding anymore. She was bait. What does it mean to choose visibility after surviving erasure? Authorization came through like a slow funeral bell. Phantom Unit 11, active. Black Viper 1, reinstated. Riker handed her the needle, the original ink. She refreshed the tattoo herself, each line deliberate, pain welcomed, pain meant agency. This makes you traceable, Riker said. That's the point. The serpent darkened, the bullet sharpened. She wasn't declaring war. She was telling the truth. Who comes for a woman who refuses to stay buried? They came quietly, always quietly. A failed vehicle test, a near-miss convoy, a sniper who never took the shot because she'd already moved. Ryland didn't chase them. She let them chase her. Each mistake they made narrowed the picture. Each shadow revealed structure. This wasn't foreign. This wasn't random. This was internal. Someone high enough to believe ghosts were tools. Willow Nash wasn't leverage. She was the message. What remains when the truth finally surfaces? The confrontation didn't happen with gunfire. It happened in a room like this one, a table, a file, a man who believed silence meant control. Ryland didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Because the tattoo wasn't proof. Her survival was. When it ended, no medals were pinned, no speeches made. Names were restored quietly. Others were erased properly this time. Ryland returned to the motor pool weeks later. Same heat, same oil. Different weight. Someone new stared at her tattoo. She didn't explain. Because dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. What if the file that says you're dead suddenly starts breathing again? Ryland Cade felt it before anyone said a word. That pressure behind the eyes. That subtle tightening in the chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition. The kind that only comes when something buried too deep begins to move. Ops Chamber 7A smelled the same as it always had. Cold air, recycled silence, faint ozone from electronics that never truly slept. But the room felt smaller now, like it remembered her, like it had been waiting. Colonel Mason Riker didn't sit. He stood with his back to her, hands braced on the edge of the table, shoulders squared not in command but restraint. The kind a man used when emotion threatened to breach discipline. I watched your file burn, he said again, slower this time, as if repeating it might change the outcome. Ryland remained standing, not at attention, never that. She had learned a long time ago that rigid posture invited control. She stood loose, balanced, ready. I watched mine get folded into a casualty report, she replied. Flag presentation, closed casket, a name pronounced wrong. Riker turned then. His eyes searched her face like they were looking for a seam, a flaw, something to explain how she was standing in front of him instead of beneath dirt. But Ryland had perfected the art of being unremarkable. Survival had demanded it. They told us nothing was recoverable, he said. There wasn't, she answered evenly, not in a way that counted. She stepped closer, close enough that the map's ghostly glow washed over her features, close enough for him to see the faint lines near her eyes that hadn't been there years ago. Not age, something else. Endurance. "You were pulled out," Riker said, not a question. "No insignia," she replied. "No patch, no voice I could place, just hands that knew where to grab and when to run." Silence settled, heavy but not awkward. This was a silence built from shared understanding, from knowing what it took to survive something that wasn't supposed to leave witnesses. "They didn't debrief you," Riker said quietly. "They didn't let me remember," Ryland corrected. "Not all at once." She tapped her temple lightly, a gesture almost invisible. "They fragment you," she continued. "Memory becomes optional. Trauma gets filed under operational necessity. By the time the fog lifts, you don't know which pieces belong to you anymore." Riker swallowed. "They put you in maintenance," he said. "They put me where I could be useful without being visible," she replied. "Where I could fix broken systems and never be asked why I knew how." He exhaled slowly. The sound carried weight. "They buried you alive," he said. Ryland didn't argue. Instead, she glanced at the folder on the table, the one with the black seal, the one that hadn't existed yesterday. "You didn't bring me here to mourn," she said. "You brought me here because something's wrong." Riker slid the tablet across the table. The image was grainy, a drone capture, heat distortion along the edges, but the facial structure cut through the noise. Ryland felt it like a pressure drop. "No," she said instinctively, "that's not possible." "Biometric match," Riker replied. 99.2%. The name sat beneath the image like a threat. "Willow Nash." Ryland's throat tightened, not with grief but something sharper, confusion laced with anger, the kind that demanded answers. "She died," Ryland said. "I watched the blast take the ridge. I watched the fire roll downhill. I watched." "You watched what you were allowed to watch," Riker interrupted gently. That stopped her. He leaned forward, palms flat on the table. "Someone accessed sealed after-action reports," he continued. "Psych evaluations, embedded cover identities, files that were never meant to be reopened." "Why now?" Ryland asked. "Because ghosts don't stay quiet forever," he said, "and someone out there thinks yours are worth collecting." The word ghosts lingered. Ryland stared at the image again, at the familiar angle of the jaw, the posture even in stillness. Willow had always stood like that, ready to move, ready to vanish. "They're not hunting us," Ryland said slowly. "They're testing us." Riker nodded. "Leverage. Survivors carry secrets. Survivors carry guilt. Survivors are predictable." Ryland almost smiled. "That's where they're wrong," she said. She looked up, eyes steady. "You don't hunt leverage," she continued. "You bait it." The room felt different then, like a decision had been made. Riker slid the sealed envelope toward her. Red wax, pressed ring mark. "Echo mark." "Not a summons," he said, "a key." Ryland didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, she rolled up her sleeve. The tattoo caught the light. "You know what this means," Riker said. "I know what it's always meant," she replied. "You just forgot." Her fingers closed around the envelope. And somewhere deep beneath Fort Ravenhall, systems older than the building itself stirred awake. The cafeteria should have been loud. Midday always was. But Ryland noticed the quiet the way she noticed everything now, like a wrong note in a familiar song. She didn't lift her head, didn't rush. She ate with deliberate calm, each movement measured. Reflections told the story. A man near the soda dispenser, civilian clothes, military posture, stirring coffee he never drank, watching glass instead of faces. Once was coincidence. Twice was curiosity. The third time was confirmation. Her heartbeat didn't change. She adjusted her tray slightly. enough to catch the convex mirror mounted near the serving line. Another angle, another face, younger, nervous, pretending not to pretend. Surveillance didn't tail targets. It contained them. She finished her meal, stood, disposed of the tray. Didn't look back. Outside, sunlight reflected off the glass, just enough to see the hand lift, the subtle nod, the call placed. By the time she reached the motor pool, Ryland had already memorized 5 unfamiliar faces and mapped 4 exit routes she hoped she wouldn't need. Connors was waiting near Bay 12. "Colonel wants you," he said quietly. She nodded. The walk back to Ops Chamber 7A felt heavier, not longer but denser. Every hallway seemed to hum with possibility. Every door felt like a hinge on something larger than her. Inside, Riker didn't waste words. "They've compiled full dossiers," he said. "Movement patterns, aliases, embedded covers." "Mine's on top," Ryland said. Riker's silence confirmed it. He placed another envelope on the table, heavier this time. "Emberfall directive," he said. "Authorization came through." Ryland stared at the seal. 2 years pretending the war was over. 2 years wearing grease like camouflage. 2 years convincing herself that staying quiet was the same as being free. She picked up the envelope. And somewhere inside her, something old and disciplined stood up straight. Not with pride. With purpose. Because sometimes survival isn't about staying alive. Sometimes it's about deciding when to return. What does it feel like when the cover you've lived under starts peeling itself away in public? Ryland Cade felt it in the motor pool before anyone spoke. The air had changed. Not temperature, tension. The kind that made conversations shorter and eye contact brief. Tools still clanged. Engines still coughed. But people were listening now not to sounds but to absences. She kept working. Hands steady. Wrench turning. Sleeves rolled just enough to expose the tattoo without advertising it. She didn't need to provoke attention. Attention was already looking for her. Someone nearby whispered her name. Not loud, not brave. The way people say things when they're trying to decide whether a rumor is safe to believe. Ryland didn't look up. She had learned long ago that when people were curious, stillness unsettled them more than confrontation ever could. The Falcon transport finally responded to her adjustments, its engine settling into a low, obedient hum. She shut it down, wiped her hands on a rag, and felt it then, a familiar internal click, the sense that a window had just closed somewhere else. She straightened and scanned the motor pool through reflections instead of faces, polished steel, windshields, a side mirror angled wrong. 2 men she hadn't seen yesterday stood near the supply cage, too clean for maintenance, too still for logistics. One pretended to check inventory, the other pretended not to watch her. Pretending was always the tell. Ryland rolled her sleeve down an inch. Not hiding, measuring. She stepped away from the transport and crossed toward the tool bench, passing a cluster of junior mechanics who went quiet as she approached. Their eyes dropped to her forearm, then away. Not mockery this time, something closer to uncertainty. Good, she thought. Uncertainty slowed people down. Master Sergeant Connors caught her eye from across the lot. He didn't signal, didn't nod, just shifted his stance slightly, weight to the left, hands loose. Ready. She finished logging the repair and turned in her tools. Normal motions, normal pace. The routine mattered. Routine told observers there was nothing urgent happening. Urgency invited mistakes. As she stepped outside the bay, a voice called her name. Cade. She stopped, turned halfway, not confrontational, not submissive. Yes. Lieutenant Marinu stood 10 feet away, posture stiff, expression undecided. He was young enough to believe rank protected him from consequences, old enough to sense when something wasn't adding up. I need a word, he said. About engines, Ryland asked. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. About you. Connors appeared at Ryland's side like he'd always been there. Lieutenant, he said evenly, unless this is a maintenance discrepancy, you're interfering with scheduled operations. Marinu hesitated. His eyes flicked, just once to Ryland's forearm, then back to Connors. I saw her file, he said, at least part of it. Connors didn't react. Then you saw enough to know when to stop. Silence stretched. The men near the supply cage had gone still, watching without appearing to. Ryland met Marinu's gaze, calm, empty. If you have a concern, she said quietly, you should take it to your commanding officer. Marinu swallowed. He wasn't afraid of her, not yet. He was afraid of being wrong. He stepped back. Connors waited until the lieutenant had moved out of earshot before speaking. You're lit up, he murmured. Not officially, but people are asking. Ryland nodded once. They're supposed to. Connors studied her face. You sure about that? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked past him, toward the perimeter fence shimmering in the heat. No, she said finally, but I'm done deciding based on comfort. That night, she didn't go back to her quarters. She walked the long way around the base, sticking to shadows, counting cameras, noting blind spots that hadn't been updated since the last infrastructure overhaul. Someone had been sloppy or arrogant. Either way, it gave her options. Her comm vibrated once. One pulse. Riker. She altered her path without breaking stride. Ops Chamber 7A was darker than before. Screens glowed low. The room felt like it was holding its breath. They're moving faster than expected, Riker said as soon as she entered. Because I didn't run, Ryland replied. He nodded. They wanted you to. He brought up a map. No labels, no flags. Just lines and shaded regions that told a story to anyone trained to read it. 2 teams went dark in the last 6 hours, he said. Not hours, watching hours. They're triangulating reactions, Ryland said, seeing who flinches. Riker glanced at her. You didn't. I haven't had time, she said. When they want me to flinch, they'll come closer. As if summoned by the words, a soft chime echoed through the room. An alert. Riker checked the display, jaw tightening. They accessed Ravenhol's legacy server, he said. Not breached, accessed. Ryland leaned in. Internal clearance. Yes. She exhaled slowly. This wasn't a leak. This was a doorway someone had always intended to use. They're not just after Phantom Unit 11, she said. They're after the narrative. Riker looked at her sharply. Dead operatives don't contradict official histories, she continued. Survivors do. He sat down heavily, and Willow. Ryland's gaze softened for a fraction of a second. Willow was never supposed to survive, which means if she did, she knows something they can't erase. The image of Willow on the tablet flashed in her mind, the way her shoulders angled, the set of her jaw. Alive. Or at least active. I want eyes on the Tharwind expanse, Ryland said. Quiet ones. Riker hesitated. That's outside. I know, she cut in gently, which is why it matters. He studied her, not as a colonel now, as a man weighing whether to trust a ghost with unfinished business. Emberfall authorizes recon, he said finally, not engagement. Ryland nodded. I won't fire unless fired upon. That's not what I meant, Riker replied. She met his gaze. I know. Later, alone in her temporary quarters, Ryland sat on the edge of the bunk and stared at her forearm. The tattoo felt warmer than usual, freshened ink still sensitive beneath the skin, a reminder that some marks didn't fade, they sharpened. She thought about the years she'd spent small, useful, invisible, how she'd convinced herself it was peace. It hadn't been peace. It had been pause. Her comm vibrated again, this time longer. Encrypted burst, no ID. She decoded it manually, old habit. Coordinates, no signature, no explanation. Just a timestamp and a phrase that made her chest tighten. You should have stayed dead. Ryland smiled, not with humor but resolve. They always say that, she murmured to the empty room. She powered down the lights and lay back, eyes open, listening to the bass settle into night. Sleep didn't come, but clarity did. Because whoever had sent that message had made one mistake. They thought she was hiding, and that meant they hadn't yet realized she was already moving. What happens when the hunter realizes she's already standing inside the trap? The coordinates burned into Ryland Cade's mind long after the screen went dark. She didn't write them down, didn't need to. Muscle memory handled that now, the kind built from years when forgetting meant dying. She lay on the bunk in the dark, counting breaths, listening to the low, familiar noises of Fort Ravenhull settling into sleep. Distant engines cooling, footsteps fatting, a bass pretending everything was normal. Normal was a luxury she no longer believed in. The message, "You should have stayed dead," hadn't frightened her. Fear was loud and imprecise. This was something else, a declaration. Whoever sent it wasn't probing anymore. They were claiming territory. And they believed she was already inside it. By dawn, Ryland was back in the motor pool, moving through routine with deliberate care. Routine was camouflage. She logged maintenance reports, exchanged minimal words, kept her posture neutral. But beneath the surface, she was dissecting the base's rhythm, noting subtle shifts. Extra patrols near comms. A sensor sweep that lingered too long near legacy servers. Someone was nervous. Good. She caught Connors watching her from across the lot, his expression unreadable. He didn't approach, didn't need to. Silence between veterans carried information faster than words. At 900, a maintenance transport rolled out under her authorization. No escort, no questions, just another vehicle doing another job. That was the advantage of being forgettable for so long. No one noticed when you stopped asking permission. The desert opened up fast beyond the perimeter, flat, bleached, honest in a way people rarely were. Ryland drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely near the console, eyes scanning not the road but the space around it. Mirrors, shadows, heat ripples. She wasn't alone. She didn't acknowledge it. The coordinates led her to an abandoned relay station half buried by sand and time, once critical, now listed as decommissioned, the kind of place oversight forgot and secrets remembered. She parked a kilometer out and approached on foot. The wind carried the smell of dust and old metal. Her boots left shallow prints she knew wouldn't last. She circled wide, checking angles, counting cover points. No movement, no obvious surveillance. Which meant the real observation was elsewhere. Inside the station, light filtered through broken panels, stripping the floor in pale bands. Ryland moved slowly, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Her breathing stayed even. Her pulse did not. A voice broke the silence. "You're late." Ryland didn't reach for a weapon. She turned toward the sound with measured calm. Willow Nash stepped out from behind a rusted console, her silhouette sharpening as she moved into the light. Alive. Not unscarred, not untouched, but undeniably alive. For a moment, just one, Ryland felt something fracture inside her. Not joy, not relief. Something closer to grief finally finding a shape it could speak to. "I had to be sure," Ryland said. Willow's mouth twitched. "That's what they always say." They stood facing each other, the space between them charged with history. Black Hollow Ridge lived there. Fire, screams cut short, orders half finished. "You shouldn't have come alone," Willow said. "I didn't," Ryland replied. "They're watching both of us." Willow nodded once. "Good, let them." She moved closer and Ryland noticed the differences. A stiffness in her left shoulder, a slight delay when she turned her head. Survival had costs. They always did. They want the truth, Willow said quietly, or what they can pass off as it. They won't get either, Ryland answered. Willow studied her, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion etched into her features. You're still the same. No, Ryland said, I'm quieter. They shared a look then, one that acknowledged everything they couldn't afford to say out loud. They're not just cleaning files, Willow continued. They're building a narrative where Phantom Unit 11 never existed, where our missions were failures blamed on variables they've already erased. And survivors complicate that, Ryland said. Survivors testify, Willow corrected. Outside, the wind shifted. Ryland's instincts flared. We don't have much time, she said. Willow nodded. I know, they think I'm leverage, they think you're bait. And what do you think? Ryland asked. Willow's gaze hardened. I think they forgot what happens when women who were trained to disappear decide to be seen. The first shot didn't hit anything. It wasn't meant to. A warning, a declaration. Dust kicked up near the relay's outer wall. Ryland moved instantly, pulling Willow down behind cover as the echo rolled across the desert. 2 teams, Willow said, minimum. Ryland closed her eyes for half a second, not to pray, but to calculate. They expect us to run, she said. Willow smiled grimly. We won't. They split without discussion. Old habits resurfaced effortlessly. Ryland circled wide, using the station's collapsed framework as concealment. She didn't fire. She observed, counted footsteps, marked patterns. These weren't amateurs. They moved with confidence, with authorization. Internal, Ryland realized, again. Her comm vibrated softly, Riker's encrypted channel. I see them, he said, no greeting, no question. So do I, Ryland replied. Your outside parameters. She almost laughed. Those expired when they tried to erase us. Silence, then, extraction in 10. No, Ryland said, we end this here. You don't have clearance. I don't need it. Another pause, longer this time. 7 minutes, Riker said. That's all I can buy you. Ryland disconnected. She moved with precision now, revealing herself just enough to draw attention, then vanishing again. The teams tightened, responding exactly as she predicted. Overconfidence made people sloppy. A shadow moved where no shadow should be. Ryland struck fast, disarming, incapacitating, disappearing before the man hit the ground. No unnecessary force, no theatrics, just efficiency. By the time Willow rejoined her, 2 operatives were down and the rest were scrambling, uncertain. They're pulling back, Willow said. They didn't come to capture, Ryland replied. They came to confirm. Confirm what? Willow asked with her eyes. That we're still dangerous. Extraction came with dust and noise and too many eyes. Ryland and Willow boarded without ceremony. As the desert fell away beneath them, Willow exhaled shakily. They won't stop now. Ryland stared out at the horizon. They were never going to. Back at Ravenhull, the fallout was immediate and silent. Files locked down, clearances revoked, names shuffled, a controlled panic. Riker met her in Ops Chamber 7A, his expression grave. They wanted you gone, he said, both of you. And now, Ryland asked. Now they're afraid. She nodded, fear made people honest. Later, alone again, Ryland cleaned the dust from her boots and thought about the moment she'd seen Willow step into the light, about the years stolen, about the choice she'd made to stop hiding. She touched the tattoo on her forearm. The serpent felt solid, grounded. They had tried to erase her. Instead, they had reminded her who she was. And somewhere deep in the system, the truth had begun to surface, slowly, relentlessly. Like something that refused to stay buried. What do you do when survival stops being the goal, and responsibility takes its place? Ryland Cade didn't sleep after the extraction. She sat instead, boots off, forearms resting on her knees, eyes fixed on the far wall of the temporary quarters Riker had assigned her. The room was clean, too clean, surfaces bare, no personal items, designed for people passing through, not staying. She lived in places like this before. Back then, it had meant she was expendable. Now it meant something else. Her comm vibrated just once, a secure ping, not urgent, deliberate. She stood, rolled her shoulders once, and headed for Ops Chamber 7A. The base felt different at night, not quieter, just more honest, fewer performances, less noise to hide behind. As she walked, she noticed doors guarded that hadn't been yesterday, screens darkened. Personnel moved with clipped efficiency, eyes forward, conversations cut short. Fear was contagious. Inside Ops Chamber 7A, Riker wasn't alone. Two civilians stood near the far console. No insignia, no uniforms. Their presence said everything uniforms couldn't. One man, one woman. Both carried themselves with the calm of people who believed the system would protect them. It rarely did. Black Viper 1, the woman said, testing the name like it was a hypothesis. Ryland didn't correct her. Riker gestured to the chair. Sit. Ryland remained standing. Say what you're here to say, she replied. The man exchanged a glance with his partner. You disrupted an ongoing containment operation. Ryland tilted her head slightly. You tried to erase living people. Assets, he corrected. She smiled without warmth. People remember when you call them that. The woman stepped forward. Phantom Unit 11 was a mistake, a necessary one but still a mistake, too autonomous, too visible in hindsight. And whose hindsight? Ryland asked. Silence answered. Riker broke it. They want a clean closure. Ryland finally sat. You don't get clean, she said calmly. You get consequences. The man folded his hands. We're offering protection, relocation, new identities for both of you. Willow's name hung unspoken between them. No, Ryland said. The woman frowned. This isn't a negotiation. It is, Ryland replied, because you're here. She leaned forward slightly. If you could erase us quietly, she continued, you would have. You didn't. That means you can't. The man's jaw tightened. You think exposure gives you leverage? He asked. No, Ryland said, truth does. She tapped the table once. You've already lost control of the narrative, she went on. Internal teams are asking why redacted files are moving, why legacy servers woke up, why two deceased operatives just walked back onto the board. The woman glanced at Riker. He didn't look away. Ryland watched it all with detached focus. You trained us to operate without recognition, she said quietly, without witnesses, without acknowledgement, and now you're surprised we learned how to survive without you. The civilians didn't respond immediately. Finally, the woman spoke. What do you want? Ryland didn't answer right away. She thought about Willow standing in the desert light, about Connors watching the motor pool with quiet loyalty, about the junior mechanics who no longer laughed at her tattoo. I want the files unlocked, she said. Not public, accurate, names restored where they belong, records sealed properly, no more half-burials. The man scoffed. That's impossible. No, Ryland corrected. It's inconvenient. She leaned back. And I want Phantom Unit 11 formally dissolved, she added. No ghosts, no loose ends, no future versions. Riker's eyes flicked to her, surprised. You want it erased? He asked. I want it finished, she replied. Silence stretched. The woman exhaled slowly. You're asking us to admit failure. Ryland met her gaze. I'm asking you to stop creating it. When they left, the room felt lighter, not resolved, but shifted. Riker studied her for a long moment. You just made enemies. I already had them, Ryland said. Now they know my terms. He nodded slowly. Willow. She stays off-grid, Rylan replied. By choice, but she gets access, support, a real out. Riker didn't argue. Later, Rylan found Willow in a secured wing, sitting cross-legged on a cot, methodically cleaning sand from her gear. She looked up as Ryland entered, eyes sharp. "They come?" Willow asked. "Yes." "And?" Ryland sat across from her. They blinked. Willow chuckled softly. "Didn't think I'd live to see that." "You weren't supposed to," Ryland said gently. Willow's hands paused, just for a second. "You ever wonder what happens next?" Willow asked. "All the time," Ryland replied. "And?" Ryland considered. "Next is the part where we stop reacting." Willow raised an eyebrow. "You thinking bigger?" Ryland shook her head. "Smaller, quieter, more permanent." Willow studied her, then nodded. "I can live with that." In the days that followed, the base shifted again. Subtly, official memos circulated, access protocols updated, questions answered with carefully worded truths instead of silence. Ryland returned to the motor pool once, just once. The Falcon transport she'd fixed days earlier started clean on the first try. A young mechanic watched her work with something like respect. "Nice ink," he said, tentative. Ryland glanced at her forearm, then back at the engine. "It's functional." That night she packed lightly. Riker met her near the gate, dawn just beginning to thin the dark. "You could stay," he said. She shook her head. "I stayed long enough." "Where will you go?" Ryland looked toward the horizon, somewhere honest. He hesitated. "If they need you again." "They won't," she said softly. "And if they do, they'll know where to find me." They stood in silence for a moment. "You changed things," Riker said finally. Ryland considered that, thought about the cost, the weight. "No," she replied, "I finished something." As she drove out of Fort Ravenhull, the sun rose behind her, casting long shadows across the road. She didn't look back. Some stories didn't need witnesses. They needed endings. And for the first time since Black Hollow Ridge, Ryland Cade felt something she hadn't dared to name before. Not victory. Relief. What remains when the noise fades, and no one is left to watch. Ryland Cade learned the sound of quiet again on an empty stretch of road where the desert didn't care who she had been. The base was gone behind her. The gate, the salutes, the weight of expectation disguised as duty. Ahead, there was nothing but asphalt dissolving into heat and the low hum of a vehicle that didn't ask questions. She drove until the sun climbed high enough to bleach shadows thin. Then she stopped. Not because she was tired, because she was finished. She stepped out of the vehicle and let the silence press in. No comms, no encrypted pings, no eyes tracking movement through glass and steel, just wind and distance and the faint ache in her forearm where the tattoo rested beneath the skin, settled now, no longer angry. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting. People thought the hardest part of surviving was staying alive. They were wrong. The hardest part was deciding who you were when no one needed you to be anything else. She rented a small place near nothing in particular. One room, one window, no neighbors close enough to wonder. She took work that required her hands and little else, fixing generators, restoring old machinery, things that had been abandoned because someone decided they weren't worth the effort anymore. Machines were honest like that. They broke for reasons. They worked when treated right. They didn't pretend. Some nights Ryland dreamed of Black Hollow Ridge. Not the fire, not the screams, the moments before, the quiet coordination, the trust, the way Willow's voice had sounded steady even when the world was coming apart. Other nights she dreamed of nothing at all. Weeks passed, then months. The world kept spinning without Phantom Unit 11. Files were corrected quietly, names restored where they could be. Some families received amended reports, Nothing dramatic, just truth trimmed to what it could safely be. It wasn't justice, but it was dignity. Willow sent messages sometimes, short, unsentimental, a location, a status, still moving, still choosing. Alive. Ryland never replied immediately. She didn't need to. They both understood that silence didn't mean absence. One evening, as the sky folded itself into deep orange and blue, Ryland sat outside with a cup of cooling coffee and watched the light fade. She realized something then, something simple and unsettling. No one was coming for her. The idea should have brought relief. Instead, it brought a hollow pause. For so long, her life had been shaped by reaction, orders, threats, erasure, survival as defiance, purpose defined by opposition. Now there was no enemy pressing close enough to sharpen her focus. She had won, and victory, it turned out, was quiet. She touched the tattoo absently. The serpent no longer felt like a warning. It felt like a reminder, not of what she'd done, but of what she'd endured. Weeks later, she saw the colonel again. Not in uniform, not on a base, just a man standing in the shade of a roadside cafe, older than she remembered, posture less rigid, eyes still sharp. "You look like someone who learned how to rest," Riker said. Ryland raised an eyebrow. "Careful, that sounds like an accusation." He smiled faintly. "I came to say goodbye." "You already did," she replied. "Yes," he said, "but this one's for me." They sat, spoke little. Some people didn't need summaries. "The board closed the last open inquiry," Riker said eventually. "Phantom Unit 11 is officially a footnote, not a liability." Ryland nodded. "Good." "They asked about you," he added. "And?" she asked. "I told them the truth." She waited. "That some people don't disappear," he said. "They conclude." She smiled at that, just a little. When he left, Ryland stayed seated, watching dust drift across the road. She felt lighter, not because she was free, but because nothing was unfinished anymore. That night she took out the small tin case she'd carried all this time. The needle, the ink. She studied them under the lamp's low glow. Then she put them away. Some marks didn't need refreshing. They needed honoring. Years later, somewhere far from deserts and bases, a young woman sat at a table with an old photograph she didn't fully understand. A black and white image, 6 figures blurred by motion, one of them unmistakably female, sleeves rolled, forearm turned just enough for something dark to coil into view. "Who is she?" the woman asked. An older voice answered quietly, "Someone who did her job and walked away." "Is she a hero?" The voice paused, then, "No, she was something harder." "What?" "Whole." Ryland Cade never told her story. She didn't need to. Because the people who mattered felt it. In policies rewritten carefully, in missions never repeated, in quiet safeguards installed where arrogance once lived. Her strength wasn't loud. It didn't demand statues or speeches. It moved systems just enough to make them humane. And when she finally looked at her reflection years later, hair touched with silver, eyes steady, hands still capable, she didn't see a ghost. She saw a woman who had survived erasure without becoming empty. She had been ignored. She had been broken. She had been buried alive. And still she chose restraint over revenge, truth over spectacle, completion over applause. Somewhere a serpent rested coiled around a bullet, no longer a threat. Just a memory. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.